Today's webinar is called Awakening Your Manifesting Abilities. So we're going to talk about manifestation and go into the fine detailed mechanics of that process. Still have people arriving. I'm really excited about this webinar because, as everybody knows, the couple of weeks before the webinar, I always get a lot of downloads and information about the upcoming topic. And this last couple of weeks has been a really fun ride. Lots of great information has come in. So I'm excited to share all of that with you. But as usual, I will start this webinar, as I start all webinars, with a little prayer of gratitude, followed by short description of what energy healing is, followed by diving into tonight's topic. Okay, here we go. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being this live webinar, for being all of us, and through all of us blessing our time together to work efficiently and profoundly. We want to bring out the most important salient points about the manifesting process and focus on the most important areas that need to heal in order to upgrade everybody's manifesting abilities. Thank you to our ancestors for the presence of the physical body and for a lot of our ways of thinking and beliefs and a lot of our skills and abilities and all that. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom for being the bridge between the absolute and the relative, and for supporting and upholding the flow of wisdom and knowledge from the absolute to the relative. Thank you, everybody. All right. What is energy healing in a nutshell? Energy healing is focusing attention in an intelligent and concise manner, using attention like the tool, as the tool, using it to bridge the gap between suffering and divine expression. In energy healing, we need to know where to focus the attention and how to focus the attention in order to get the right results, or I'd say the intended results. So some of the questions, some great questions came in this week from longtime webinar participants. So, very deep, thoughtful questions, which I really appreciate so much, everybody's questions. So we'll go into some of those today. And if any of you have questions, feel free. If any of you have questions, you can also feel free, but I'll try to address those in the latter half of the healing webinar so that we can focus on, not get too distracted as we go into the healing process and just be able to sort of work through the healing process as a smooth flow. All right. And by the way, if you send your questions by the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, then I will have those and I can continue to attend to them in case I don't get to them during the webinar. All right. So today's topic, I just hit it for myself. Awakening your manifesting abilities. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're using energy healing when we heal ourselves or when we do anything. We're actually using awareness or attention as the tool to manifest a higher level of health or to manifest whatever we want. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn that manifesting skill onto the process of manifestation itself. So it's like folding manifesting capabilities onto the process of manifestation in order to wake that up, enliven it up, and get it to a level where it's working even better for all of us. So that's my intention for this webinar, is increased capacity to manifest from consciousness alone for everyone. There is a Vedic word for that. It's ritam, and that means to manifest from consciousness alone, essentially. And I was wondering if I should start with a quote, because one of my dear friends, let's see, she's somewhere, but she sent me a beautiful quote on the topic of manifestation, and it's so fabulous. And as I was reading it, I realized, we can dive into several of these sentences are worth looking into more deeply. So I think I'll offer it to you first. This is from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who's a great Indian saint and spiritual leader in our world, deceased. The formula for producing maximum results is to disregard the obstacles and negative influences which offer resistance to the performance of action. The doer should engage in action and continue until the desired results are achieved. When the standard of consciousness is raised through the process of meditation, and that means contact with the source of creation, right? Meditation. The action performed at the highest level of life, energy, and intelligence will have an overriding influence on karma. All right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's better. Thank you. All right. We're talking about how this is, because this was really the key sentence in the whole thing, of raising the standard of consciousness as the key to performing action at a higher level of life energy and intelligence. This overrides the influence of karma. That's really interesting to me, right? Because karma is, we think of it as kind of unavoidable, but you can actually override the influence of karma by raising your consciousness from, so karma from the past will still produce, it overrides the influence of karma from the past, and therefore the action will still produce maximum results. This is how, with regular experience of transcending, supplemented by the power of charity and virtuous deeds, so dharmic action, the negative influence of past karma can be counteracted and the path of present karma smoothed. Then the action will be performed without resistance or obstacle, yielding maximum results. This is how the power of present action or karma, this is how by the power of present action or karma, destiny is controlled. Herein lies the full meaning of the saying that man is master of his own destiny. All right, so that was interesting. So from the angle, okay, so that's a nice quote that kind of, it's in a nutshell. There's a lot of density, like every one of those sentences is full of a lot of meaning. So I'd like to take now another angle on this from the perspective of energy healing, right? Okay, so in energy healing, we're focusing our attention intelligently. What I've noticed over the years is that the area of the field of consciousness or attention where the greatest power to basically gain mastery over your destiny, the greatest control over the relative, is at the finest level of manifestation, because everything that the relative builds up from the absolute to the relative in layers. So the earlier layers, the more abstract layers, form the foundation for the later manifestation, for the actual, by the time you get to something totally physically manifested, you know, it's gone through many, many stages of development before it gets to that point. So the key is to go into the finest level of consciousness and work with that. So I was looking at this finest level of consciousness over the last couple of weeks. And as we know, we've talked about this causal level of creation a lot. And when it comes to manifesting, by my perception, it is the lively value of consciousness at the causal level that is most important to activate in order to manifest whatever you want to manifest. That lively value at the causal level is fed. It's nourished. It's nourished by the finest byproducts of the human physiology. The finest, when I say finest byproducts, I mean if we follow the creation of energy in the human body down to the subcellular level inside the cells, what we see is there's this point of very significant transformation inside the cells in the mitochondria, where the food that we've eaten, the content, the valuable content of the food, has broken down to such a fine degree that it's just consciousness. And as consciousness, it interacts with the consciousness of our bodies. And at that point, the difference between the consciousness of the food and the consciousness of the body, it's so fine that the very, very tiniest, finest little friction occurs in the cells that allows for that food to become something useful to us. But it's so fine, that friction is so fine, that it also feeds these very, very deep intelligences in the physiology. I'm checking into everyone's physiology, checking into the subcellular level of everyone's physiology, and we want to shine the light of our awareness into that very, very fine gap where the consciousness of the food becomes the consciousness of the body. And from there, the body rebuilds, right? Then it builds tissues and the whole thing layers up. But just at that fine level, this is so important, because whatever qualities we're experiencing at that really fine level of the physiology will determine the flavor or the nature of that fine friction. And in previous videos, I've used the word soma to describe that as this very, very fine product produced in the body. And as this question actually came up in a previous webinar, because I was under the impression I had learned previously from my understanding of Ayurveda that soma is the byproduct, the finest byproduct of digestion. So I thought, oh, well, then it must be made in the gut, right? Because that's kind of like when the food goes down to its finest level, it's in the gut. And then I realized, no, there's like a whole nother finer level of digestion beyond the gut, which is in every cell of the body. So really, soma is produced systemically in the body. And it feeds that finest intelligence. So if the soma is really sweet, right, then what you do is you feed those most refined, most profound intelligences in the body. And if the soma is more like a dark soma with some little bit of harshness in it or something, then that will feed other types of intelligences that may not produce the types of effects that we want. There are actually 3 parts to this whole manifesting process. But before we go on to all 3 and see how they all fit together precisely, I'd like to go back, and because we're already 15 minutes into our session, let's do some healing. So again, checking back into the subcellular level of physiologies, into the mitochondria, which is where the really fancy action takes place of the digestive process. What I'm seeing in some people's physiologies is that the cells themselves have, and this maybe is a little bit related with age, maybe loosely related with age, but the cells themselves in some cases have difficulty absorbing the nutrients in the first place. Before we even get to that very finest point of the digestive process, we want to make sure that the physiology is able to, that the cells themselves are able to receive and accept and allow the very best of the nutrients that you consume to come in to that area. So what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing a variety of different effects in the cell walls, in the receptocytes on the cells. In some physiologies, there's some buildup of material in the plasma of the body, like the ventricle fluid and the sort of the liquid of the body, which is not necessarily supportive. It can go in, and it can very, very, very fine particles can go in and create trouble in the physiology. And so what we have to do here, it appears, is we have to, I'm just asking being, I close my eyes and it's the silence is there too, that we need to upgrade the intelligence of the cells, because the only way that small particles that are like a subcellular size that can get caught around the walls of the cells and disrupt the flow of nutrients is when the cell itself is intelligent enough to recognize that material and slough it off. The cells have to slough it off. So I'm asking can the cells, anyway, this is the first one. I hope I remember all of them because I saw like a whole slew of them at once. But anyway, we'll work one at a time. I'm asking if the cells, if there's a way to, as in this quote, to upgrade the standard of consciousness at a cellular level of the physiology. So the cells themselves become more intelligent. And the answer that's coming back from being is that every cell has its own little pocket of intelligence. It has its own little overseeing administrative function. And so we're appealing to that level of our body's intelligence, which is at a cellular level. And this would be very, very, the whole body is just full of these fine, fine, delicate little intelligences around every cell. I know, it's so sweet, right? The first quality, I'm just taking a read on these intelligences. The first quality that I see is a quality of utmost innocence. Innocence, sensitivity, purity. So these intelligences are the precise types of intelligences that I was referring to earlier that are fed by soma, that are fed by this fine material that comes through the physiology. So what we're doing is, and I didn't quite have time to draw you guys a diagram today. I wanted to, maybe I'll have one by tomorrow. I'm hoping. I have a diagram I'd like to draw, but I mentioned before that there are different grades of soma. There are different grades. So asking how are there different grades? In the healing, what we're doing is we're going to pull out the finest grade of soma. So that's just letting everybody know that the attention is on bringing out the finest possible grade of that material. But everything that manifests as a byproduct of something known as the three gunas. The three gunas are very abstract, very fundamental principles that help provide a format for understanding how manifestation occurs. Sattva guna is that energy that's responsible for the growth and development and the freshness and the creative expression of the system. Raja guna is the one that maintains the whatever that manifested form is. And then tamas guna is the one that is responsible for the dissolution or the dissolving of whatever the system is. So you have these three. And I think we talked about them a little bit in one of the previous webinars when we were referencing the 112-point matrix, because if anybody wants to look at that blog post, I think there's some descriptions in there. But the principle here is that sattva guna and tamas guna don't mix, because one is building up and the other is breaking down. So they cancel each other out. So what we get is a system where Rajaguna mixes with both of the other two. And this makes sense because in the manifesting process, the ability to sustain is necessary, whether the system is on the uprise or whether it's on the descent. The ability to sustain allows anything to manifest enough in the relative field of creation that it's experienced by us as humans. Otherwise, if the Rajaguna wasn't in there, the creation and the dissolution would be instantaneous and we would miss it completely. Okay, so there are like 4 quadrants on this circle. We can think of the divine dialogue, right? Because the divine dialogue is another way of describing the manifesting process, right? From infinite, unbounded, unmanifest silence, source of everything, the relative arises and it becomes fully manifest, and then it dissolves back into the silence and quality-less being. The first quadrant of that process is dominated by sattva. It is all about the expansion and the progression and the development. And Rajoguna is subdominant. In the second half or the second quarter of that process, Sattva Guna is still moving, but the sustainer element is more dominant. In the third quarter, and I'm doing this, I think, forward to me, so it might be backward to you guys, but thank you for bearing with me. In the third quarter, whatever the system is starts to deteriorate, but the sustainer is still dominant. And in the final quarter, the deteriorating energy is dominant, with some bit of sustaining still trying to hold on right down to the last second. So whatever area, whichever quadrant we're in, whichever quadrant our cells are in, at the moment that the consciousness of the food is transforming into the consciousness of the physiology, will determine the flavor or quality of the soma. So the soma can be sattva dominating, or rajas dominating with sattva underneath, or it can be rajas dominating with tamas underneath, or it can be tamas dominating with rajas. Did I say it right? Yeah. You guys get it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so there are these, as far as I can see, and it's partly, I mean, maybe there are many, many, many. See, this is like, you know, I get these downloads, they're very abstract, and then I have to find ways to put them into words and to describe them to you guys. And hopefully tomorrow I'll have a little picture so you all can look at this circle with it divided into 4 parts. But it occurs to me, maybe the reason I didn't do that was because could there be many, many, many grades as we're going along? Many grades of soma. You've got your AAA extra virgin olive oil soma, and then you've got your like all the various other grades that come down, you know, as the system unfurls and winds back down again. So what we're doing is we're identifying with consciousness that AAA top grade, the AAA top grade. That's the grade just at the emergence from unmanifest, just the closest. So what, the consciousness of the food, it comes down, the food material comes down to just consciousness alone. And then as just consciousness alone, it starts to manifest back up again like that. And what we're doing is we're putting our attention on that very, very delicate moment, just as the consciousness of the food starts to manifest as the consciousness of our bodies. And what it's doing is it's waking up a level of authenticity for each one of us at a subcellular level. Really deep authenticity, because that first moment when the consciousness of the food is fully dissolved and we're starting to re-emerge our own personal consciousness, there are no filters, there are no agendas, it's like the most pure, innocent, sweet, essential aspect of self, right? Of our consciousness. It is like the most delicate level of our consciousness. So attention is there. And what I'm feeling happening is that the soma produced at that level in the process, because you can imagine, there's probably a little soma that's produced as the food consciousness is breaking down, right? That would be with tamas. And there's a little more maybe further on up the line. But on that first quadrant, offering that back to silence of being, that piece of the soma production, that quality of the soma production is given back to the divine level of self. So it just folds right back in like that. Goes back to being. And you know what happens when things go back to being? They multiply out to infinity. So, so that's a good thing to do with that soma, is multiply it out to infinity. I'm just feeling that in the physiologies, feels like bliss. It feels like bliss, but not a big, exuberant, like showy type of bliss, but this just very, very deep, seated, stable, uh, delicate type of bliss it's very tender, it's very abstract, but it's also very, very stable in the body at the cellular level. And as that's happening, as that's starting to increase for the cells in our bodies, and for the intelligence around each little cell in our body, it's creating the bliss, is creating a little bit of purification. I can feel a little bit of that feeling of sloughing off, which is good, because what we want is we want the cells to slough off any toxins or mucus or any kind of materials that might be clogging up those ventricles, those receptocytes on the outside the cell, anything that might be inhibiting the cell's ability to absorb nutrients in the most effective manner. I'm seeing also an effect for the blood. That's interesting. I guess the blood is, the circulatory system is where we kind of carry the nutrients, especially in the plasma in the blood. But I'm seeing specifically the red blood cells, So the red blood cells are also receiving this upgrade. Now, I thought all the cells in the body were receiving the upgrade as we were doing the healing, but for some reason, the red blood cells are receiving like an extra upgrade. And that's very interesting to me, because if we use inference to say, well, why would it be the red blood cells that are receiving this upgrade extra? Why are they getting like a little more attention or a little more support on this process? The answer that's coming back to me is that the red blood cells represent fullness. They represent that aspect of the relative field of creation, which is rich, which is robust, with nutritive value, sort of, in a way, it seems like. Yeah, this is what it feels like to me, right? Because out of the hands of the mother of creation, the coins fall. Those are the coins, the expression of fullness. So, and the coins represent the red blood cells. So what this is doing is it's increasing an understanding throughout the whole body, because we know the blood goes to all the different tissues and all the different organs and all the different parts of the body. It's increasing comprehension or an understanding of an energy signature associated with wealth, with fullness, with opulence, with resource, abundant resource. And that is communicating from the red blood cells to all the other cells of the body, to all the other cells, showing them. It's like a little, very delicate communication going on at a cellular and subcellular level of physiology. This energy signature helps redefine self. And as we know, that some aspect of definition of self is part, and I wouldn't know this, by the way, without you guys, because I thought through some of this, but the fact that I'm standing in front of you and I'm saying it to you now, I am understanding more than I did before. So thank you, always thank you for that. We're doing this together. Okay, so that first emergence of the consciousness, from the consciousness of the food having broken down, and then that first emergence of the consciousness re-establishing itself as ourself, is a point of a very primordial, essential, very authentic sense of self. It's like baby self or something, right? It's like just before you got funny ideas about who you are, before you got any kind of, made any assumptions about yourself, but just the most innocent. And so it's interesting that this quality in the blood is going and communicating to the whole body about opulence and fullness and bliss. abundant joy, and to help make a modification in the way we define ourselves at a subcellular level. That's good. It's good. It's good if we can redefine ourselves in terms that are closer to source, because the more effectively we can correlate or integrate our own sense of self with the source of creation, the more effectively we can express that at the surface. And of course, that will tie into manifestation, because we think of the source of creation as being the home of all the laws of nature. And literally, we don't manifest anything without the support of the laws of nature, because the environment's got to make it happen. The reality is there's just some things that are more likely to happen than others. Okay, now I'm taking another read on everyone's physiologies, going back in and looking again at what's going on. Definitely seeing an increase of bliss in the bodies. The bliss seems to be starting mostly increasing in the chest area, but it's moving systemically also through the whole physiology. Yeah, good stuff. As the bliss increases, that also helps to increase a balanced flow of, I would like to say, the neurochemical communication within the physiology. Because when we feel happy, that happiness translates into specific types of neurochemicals like endorphins and serotonin and dopamine and different types of hormones and so forth that help keep the body balanced, but also make us just feel good. And so I'm also looking at some of the systems in the body, the endocrine system. So highly responsible for a lot of that communication, and the pituitary gland. And so the pituitary gland is also receiving some attention right now. Clearing from the pituitary gland impressions, pain, trauma, memory patterns associated with uncomfortable experiences. For some people, these are going back a long way back, not just in this physiology, right? But in memories, old memories. Clearing in meridians that run from the pituitary gland down into the deeper part of the body. Beliefs of not deserving to have your desires fulfilled, or not deserving to have what you want, not being worthy. Also beliefs that the nature of creation is that it's lacking, that just the nature of our world, our relative material world, is that it's kind of a sad, suffering, unhappy place, like that. Some of those beliefs are layered in many, many layers back into the long history of time. And there are many spots where we had our own little sort of self-speech going on, or a little self-thought process of not deserving and so forth. And so in those places, in those particular instances where some belief got a little bit locked into the system, even if that was centuries ago, where awareness is moving back through the physiologies and through the threads of the astral field, back into those points, and us now are holding, like in a loving embrace, us then, in order to reestablish a higher standard of consciousness, essentially. A higher standard of belief. And that, as that's happening, what I'm seeing, I'm experiencing for people is that the truth is emanating from the heart or chest area. So the truth emanates from here, and it follows those little threads or channels of the astral field back to the past self, sometime when maybe there was an unpleasant experience, or some unfortunate event, or even death in some uncomfortable way, or whatever may have happened, that one kind of gripped the idea, oh, life is just awful, and I don't deserve to have my desires fulfilled. That's not a useful desire. That's not a useful belief if you want to be good at manifesting, right? So we're getting rid of that one, back to its source. Back to its source. And what's underneath it or behind it is the nature of the creation to want to sometimes slow down the manifesting process so that the intelligence can go in and sequentially, step by step, understand precisely how that manifesting process happens. So that's why sometimes we have desires that don't get instantly gratified. Sometimes there are several reasons, actually. Yes, questions coming in about that. Yeah, sometimes the desire doesn't get instantly gratified because the satisfaction or the gratification of that desire in a more stretched out or spread out form allows the satisfaction to be experienced at each point of the process. And that seems, from my perception, seems to be pretty intimately connected to the capacity of each individual intellect to go into detail. The more detail-oriented we are, I'm just raising my hand. Other people are raising their hands too. I tend to be very detail-oriented. And so, right, I'm going into all these details at the fine level of creation. And so, so what happens is sometimes for me, the intention is there and the desire, but it doesn't just go poof and pop up to the surface, because if it did that, I would be missing all the juicy details. So instead, we slow it down, right? And nature has a way of kind of coming in and slowing it down. That's kind of a Saturn energy, because Saturn likes to go slowly, but because Saturn goes slowly, you get to go deep. You get to understand things at a much deeper level. That's also part of the nature of Saturn, is to go both deep and also slowly. And of course, having mentioned Saturn, automatically the awareness of our group, which has been sort of focused on the inner landscape and the inner environment, starts to make those connections out to the cosmic bodies. So this is beautiful and so important. It's such an important part of the energy healing process and the manifesting process, is that self-identification, right? We were talking about before, the first expressions of consciousness, that at that level of self, we are collective. We know ourselves as the whole creation, not just individualized, not just small self-identified. So I'm looking at those threads and those connections. And I'm finding, as I go digging, I'm digging in to look at those connections, that what's happening is awareness wants to dig back in time, back to early expressions of the universe, early expressions of manifestation. There's this place back at the beginning, like think Big Bang, right? The Big Bang early on, that was so light, so bright. What we think of as our whole universe right now is still compactified in a very small space. So you can imagine the quality of light that was present at that time was absolutely, if we can even imagine that, the concentration of light, so profound, so completely powerful, and totality in a glance. There's an energy signature that goes with that. There's a feeling of consciousness, there's a quality of consciousness that goes with that. It's being received by everyone as a download. It seems to be coming in through the threads of consciousness from the very, very early baby beginnings of the universe into the physiologies now. Seems to be coming into that point. I love it that our group, we did this, we identified this point very early in the digestive process. Very early, I'd say maybe at the end of the digestive process and at the beginning of the rebuilding process, right? That early point. And it's coming in there to light up and enhance that spot in the cells, in the mitochondria, in our physiologies. At a very fine, systemically, right? All the cells in the body. Waking up the cells at that level and filling them with light. The first light, which does bring me to another element in the manifesting. Remember I said there are three? There are three. There are three. So one, just review what we've gotten so far. One is the three gunas, because without the three gunas, nothing manifests in the relative. Another one is soma, because soma feeds, soma nourishes the aspects of consciousness that are responsible for manifesting. And I mean qualities of intelligence that circulate around specific intentions. The third would be those qualities of intelligence. And that includes Agni. Yeah, all the Agnis, all the many Agnis. And I have a page on my website, on my blog, on my knowledge base, and it lists all the different types of Agnis. There are Agnis between each of the different tissues of the body. There are different modes of Agni, right? There's an Agni that's called Samagni, that's like perfectly balanced Agni, whether it's between tissue A or B or C or D, whichever like refinement of Agni is there, that levels of refinement. At each level of refinement, you can have an Agni that's perfectly balanced, or an Agni that's overly hot, or an Agni that's not hot enough, or an Agni that's irregular. So 4 modes of Agnis there. Each Agni can resonate in those 4 modes.
And there's the Agnis that break down the food, and there's the Agnis that build up.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Because I was trying to think, because I knew there was a third section right there. Yeah, and the ones, I think the ones in the liver build up. They sort and, the Dhatu Agnis, right. Right, so then the 5 that are in the liver break it down? Yes, right, because the nutrient-rich blood goes to the liver first. Right, before it gets to the cells. Thank you. So 7 Agnis build it up, 5 break it down. I'm looking at that cycle, the building up cycle and the breaking down cycle. And one of the ideas that came up today, we were discussing with my beautiful niece who's here visiting me. We were discussing, do we divide it into 4 quadrants? Or maybe there are multiple expressions of the building up process, multiple grades of, Sattva is 90% dominant over Rajas 10%, or Sattva was 80% dominant over Rajas 20%, or whatever, however that combination goes. Yeah, okay. So that opens up a whole nother area, but I think we need to stay a little bit focused on our manifestation and our healings. So the third then are those intelligences in the body. We can call them Devic intelligences or intelligences in the field of consciousness that are responsible for the manifestation process. And in that field, Agni is a major player. Now, as I'm talking about these 7 building up Agnis and these 5 breaking down Agnis, and the Agnis in all their different modes, that's at a little more gross level. I'd like to talk about Agni in its fundamental level, its deepest, most fundamental level, where it's just basically a kind of a friction that arises when infinite silence folds into infinite dynamism, or infinite dynamism folds into infinite, collapses into infinite silence. In that collapse, that twofold collapse, that very fine friction emerges. And friction is the fuel that fuels the manifesting process. It's the gas that fuels the manifesting process. It's the energy. It's the energy. It's the fire. It's the fire. So what's happening is there's a download for everyone. And it feels like the download's coming right in and going right to the heart center, right to the center of the Mahamarma in the chest and that heart chakra. And that fire is waking up. It's waking up a mix of elements that give rise to a sense of tremendous meaning in every single experience and every single expression. It increases meaningfulness. Another thing that's happening is, as this download is coming in, I'm experiencing clear information regarding the eternal nature of this type of intelligence, this dynamic flow, and the fire of Agni. It's something that's, talk about sustaining. Agni is around from the very beginnings to the very end of creation. It sustains and sustains and sustains and sustains. Maybe it goes through its little, in everybody's bodies, like it transforms, right? In our bodies it transforms, but it never goes away. It just keeps looping. So this ability to sustain is important, evidently, for our ability to upgrade our ability to manifest in a masterful way, master of our destiny. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the relationship of the sustaining energy with that growing sattva, with the purity, the sustaining and the purity together. That every action, everything we experience in the relative is expressing and then dissolving and expressing and dissolving. But within that cycle, there can be more of a pure quality, like we were using the example this morning, you go out on a journey and you could start your journey and every leg of the journey, even coming home, could be fun. Or you could go out on a journey and terrible things would happen and you got a flat tire and you lost your wallet and bad stuff, right? So it's all different types of journeys, right? So we could have a journey that from beginning to end, from its initial intention to have the journey, all the way through its manifestation, all the way through doing the journey, all the way through coming back home, could still be dominated by the quality of sattva. Just at the end, then you go home. Then you plan another journey. So the Agni has this incredible ability, because it's so close to the source of creation, because it's born of this finest movement of consciousness in on its own nature, that it carries naturally a quality of purity in it. So even as it loops around through our physiologies, its overall effect is one of evolution. That's really beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for new information. I love it. So that ability of Agni, this is what the download is about. That ability of Agni to be an advocate for purity, for evolution, is being received by everybody's physiology in such a way that we can use those laws of nature we can apply them to our own manifesting skill sets. So whenever we have an intention, whenever we have a desire, whenever we have an idea, that the particular laws of nature that are associated with that fire that fuels the manifesting process, it becomes part of our own process from a personal level. Whether you're going to draw a picture, or you're going to have a good night's sleep, or you want to heal something, or you want to, embark on a new adventure or whatever. Okay, seems like we're getting close to our time. We've got a lot of questions. It seems like it's been just like one long, amazing healing, right? But I think I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the questions because we've got a lot of them and they're really in depth. And I want to be sure that I honor everyone's questions well. So here's a question. Breaking down does not need to be painful or uncomfortable, right? It can be experienced as restful or relief. In other words, coming home. I agree completely. And this is, this is a woman who's really, she's a very spiritual woman who understands this process very, very intimately as a longtime meditation teacher and so forth. And so the thing, when I was looking at this particular effect, hi! I think they're, oh yeah, yeah, you can go, right, okay. Sorry, there's two parties going on here, by the way, at the same time. There's a homework burning party and a bonfire in the backyard. For any of you who are getting bored with me, you can go out there. And then, and then we've got this going on in here. She could have used the back steps. Maybe next time around. Anyway, okay. So the fun never ends, eh? What was I saying? Oh yeah, I was answering this question. I was looking at this question about breaking down. Yeah, so my insight was, I was looking at this. The insight was that if one's awareness has, how did he so beautifully put that? When we've raised the standard of our consciousness to the point that the source of creation is actually a thing. Like that's something that we have names for and that we're completely familiar with the direct experience of it, and it becomes an integral part of everyday experience, then the breaking down process is absolutely going home to source. The problem has been in the past with our dear ancestors who didn't even have words for transcending. They had a word for God, but for a lot of our ancestors, the word for God didn't even really mean the transcendent the way we understand it from direct experience, right? It was more like God was like a sort of judgmental father figure up in heaven, and you couldn't ever really connect with him unless you were, following certain behaviors or something. And it was much more complicated for our ancestors in a lot of ways. I mean, not all of them. Of course, there have always been those few, right, who were very close to the transcendent when they were born and they came into the lifetime and they were able to give good expression to it and so forth. But for the majority of individuals, that source was not a thing. It couldn't be seen or heard or tasted or smelled or touched, and therefore it did not exist. So as a result, those individuals, when they got into that part of the cycle where the dissolution is taking place, it didn't feel like going home. It just felt like lack. It felt like losing. They're just losing everything that they liked and that they wanted, or there's some big purification is ripping something away from them that they wanted. So we're in a better position now. Feels like that would be a good moment for an ancestral healing, right? Because that's what the parents experienced. Okay, so we're going to take our attention, our big collective attention, and we're going to focus it in to the ancestral archive. That's at the DNA level. So we're going back into those cells again and back into the subcellular and down into the molecular level of the cells, where we find the structures that were given to us by our ancestors, those codes, which are the very expressions of their physiologies as well. And the first thing happening, of course, is that beautiful reverent love for the ancestors and all that they are and all that they've done and all that they continue to do from wherever they are, whatever level of their existence. And the next thing that I'm feeling, I'm just calling it as I see it, the next thing I feel happening is forgiveness. And I feel as if this forgiveness, in a sense, is sort of folding back into their own natures. I mean, of course, we love them, but for them, there's a little bit of a sense of, somehow I managed to get myself down into this rabbit hole where I was born at a certain time in history, and I was in a family where the traditions of understanding didn't include concepts of the transcendental field of ocean of pure consciousness as myself. And so, that somehow they managed to dig themselves down into that spot. And what we're able to provide for them is we're shining the light of a broader perspective, which then uplifts the standard of their consciousness. And that light is the light of this principle that we looked at before, which is souls over and over again will sometimes choose a slower path or a harder path in order to enjoy the detail. Because even if they didn't have a word for transcendental consciousness or the source of creation as such, we all know they experienced it. And so it was there at a very sweet, innocent, underlying, it was there almost like at that point in the beginning of the curve from the absolute up. It was so tender and so abstract for them without even a word to describe it, that it remained throughout the lifetime a very, very innocent, delicate, it remained in its purity in a way. It remained very, very pure for them. And so we're shining that light for them so they can see it. They can see that it was there, and they can see that the sacrifices they made at a relative level of their existence, which meant that almost every time something had to change or had to happen or something, it was a big suffering for everybody. They did that so that they could have a lifetime where they experienced that source of self in such a sustained delicacy, such a sustained delicacy. Seeing them, as we see that in the ancestors, the level of gratitude for what they did, for having chosen to live and die in periods of history where there was less understanding and there was much harder quality of life. The gratitude is flowing to them, and it seems to be flowing directly to the heart. That's the first spot that's receiving, directly to the heart. For a lot of them, I'm starting to see the whole digestive system open up, and now the gratitude, it flows from us, from our hearts, seeing from the heart, into that part of their cells where consciousness just starts to emerge. It just starts. So that loving gratitude goes to that spot in their physiologies that's literally the physical expression of that which they selected in that lifetime. Their selection to not really know the transcendent any more than as the most fine abstract feeling. And there I'm feeling a little like it's massaging it or something. There's a little activity there. It's a little Agni is there. Just a little Agni is there. So the Agni is being fed by the Soma at that level. It's very good in their physiologies, So what we're doing, you guys, is we are creating a healing for ourselves and for our ancestors, which restructures our own ability to produce the finest grade of soma in our physiologies, and we're doing it back for multiple generations so that it's integrated now in our physiologies now. So we don't have to wait for this to manifest. We're breaking it down, we're looking at the detail. So, and our ancestors are helping us because they are also breaking down the experience and they are also experiencing the detail. It's a beautiful team effort. And what I'm loving about this, my brain feels like it's popping right now. What I'm loving about this is that this is a technology that we are being offered right now, which is, as I mentioned before, Sometimes when people have the need, the intellectual, mental, emotional need to see in detail, very finely, what is going on, remember that Saturn energy, how the manifesting process is happening, and this can create barriers and boundaries to instant manifestation and instant gratification. Now what we can do is we can engage the teamwork of our own collective level of self. We can engage with the ancestors. We can also engage, I'm getting a yes on this, with previous incarnations and previous physiologies to allow each member of our collective to work on some piece or some facet, some aspect of whatever that intention is that we want to manifest and fulfill. So if each person works on their own little piece, then what happens is the whole thing manifests up fairly quickly. And the need to understand the details is also satisfied at the same time. That's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you guys for being brilliant. That was beautiful. I loved it. Okay. Very cool. Okay. So God bless the ancestors again and again and again and again, right? God bless them again. Okay. So here's another question. Here's a question from a lady. I think I might have answered part of this because I know I referenced it earlier in the webinar. Okay, so her experience is that most intentions are not automatically manifested, at least not right away. I think I'm going to take this one sentence at a time. Yes, and that's good, because in order for any intention to manifest, it requires a transformation, some kind of transformation from whatever the current situation is into some other different situation. And when there's a transformation like that, we want to interact with a full support from the environment, right? Because when the environment, like our ancestors being the environment, right? We want our whole inner and outer environment to be moving to support that manifestation of that intention, because from that level, the intention is an expression of an evolutionary change for everyone. Also, if we're stabilizing awareness in the source of thought and then manifesting the intention from there, we're manifesting from a collective level of our own being. So we're essentially creating an environment around that intention that supports it coming to the surface without any hindrances or barriers. I hope that made sense. I have a feeling we're going to talk a little more about that tomorrow, but that's just a feeling. That was only the first sentence of the question anyway. Okay, so sometimes intentions don't automatically manifest completely fully. Yes, and so my answer is I feel that the reason for that is because the whole field has to wake up and activate in order to make any particular specific thing come to fruition at any moment. And so there's like an engagement at the collective level as well. Often we may not even realize what is preventing the manifestation. Yes, yes. And then she goes on to elaborate that. Maybe it's just not meant to happen, right? Maybe we have an intention and the environment says that's not really evolutionary enough for everybody. So, you know, like maybe you want to be like the evil ruler of the whole world or something, but the rest of us like aren't going to be comfortable with that. So everyone's manifesting their own realities, right? So there are enough people manifesting a reality where they don't want me to become the evil ruler of the world or whatever. So that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Okay. So, so maybe it's just not meant to happen. You know, maybe it's not meant for me to like instantly become a little frog or something, you know? I'm not supposed to do that. Or maybe we just need to persevere through the obstacles. And I think the perseverance through the obstacles is another very good way of saying that sometimes we have to take the intention and follow it through to its full expression in a sort of elaborated form so that we can really appreciate every nuance of that manifesting process. And then so her question is, how do you know the difference? How do you know the difference if you think gee, I'd like to have a flower. I'd like to have a flower. And it doesn't manifest immediately. The question is, oh, look, it manifested immediately. No, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, butterflies too. No, anyway. Yeah, so if you have a thought, I'd like to have a flower, and it doesn't manifest instantly, how do you know if it's because you really aren't supposed to have a flower at that moment? Or if it's because you're supposed to enjoy more detail of the process of manifesting that flower? It's a very tricky question. It's a very tricky question. I can't say that I know that. I can't say that I know it. Oh yeah, we have an answer. Yes, yes.
Not necessarily, but you might, become a gardener or something. But a lot of times I want something, and nature's trying to hand it to me from all directions, and I don't recognize it.
Oh, that's a beautiful point. Beautiful point.
Oh,
Yeah, so her point is that sometimes she wants something, and nature is trying to hand it to her from all,
literally, I
like,
can see it,
from all different points, and yet somehow not recognizing it, or somehow not being quite in the position, right, ready to receive it. So I would say that a lot of the healings that we did today are for that. Like that whole thing of letting go of all those ideas of I don't deserve it, and I'm not good enough, and all that stuff, and working through for the ancestors too, because, or it's not possible, right? Right, it's impossible, and why should I want, start to feel guilty? Why should I have wanted that in the first place, or whatever? Ouch. So, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to think about, because this is a really profound question, by the way. Somebody who's here asked this question. How do you know the difference? I think, in my opinion, this is my opinion, everybody, in my opinion, the difference is whether the desire actually is life-supporting or not. Because if the desire is actually life-supporting, if it's aligned with Dharma, if it's good for me, but it's also good for everybody else, if the desire is on that level, and what was that quote from Arishi? He talked about charitable and virtuous deeds, right? So if it's on that level, that it's a charitable and virtuous thing to do, then I would say it's meant to happen. It is meant to happen somehow, some way, if not this day, another day, in some way it is meant to happen, or at least some form of it is meant to happen. And if for some reason the initial desire is founded on some small aspect of self, like, well, I really want this to happen because I don't really like myself very much, but I think if this happened, I'll feel more loved by everyone, or something like that, then that's not as likely to happen. That thing is not as likely to happen, because what really, there's often when something isn't meant to happen, there's something else deeper that is meant to happen. Like the thing that's really meant to happen is for you to learn to, like, so love yourself, totally love yourself, whatever, and then whatever action or activity brings you to that. So the initial desire of, I want everyone to like me, something like that, what'll happen is that might not happen right away, but what will happen instead is something else that supports your ability to like yourself so much that then you realize that everybody did like you. They just felt kind of like uncomfortable when you were there because you didn't like yourself. You know what I'm saying? So the thing that's supposed to happen is what happens. I hope that it helps answer that question. I see some raised eyebrows out there. That's good stuff. If the problem is a blockage from past karma, or our intention is not clear enough, or even mixed up with conflicting intentions, how can we be sure our intention is clear and purposeful? Yes, I feel the answer to that question is I'd like to offer a kind of like a little exercise to everybody, something you can do anytime, even if I'm not around, if you're on your own and you've got an idea about something that seems good, but you're not sure. My suggestion, I think a lot of you already know this, but my suggestion is test it. Test the idea. Because before an intention rises up and becomes fully manifest, it goes through lots of virtual stages, lots of stages of being partly manifest but not complete, and partly but not complete. And so at each stage along that process, you can test it. For example, you can just quietly fold awareness into the source of yourself and think about that idea and see how it makes you feel. Does the idea create bliss and energy and light and enthusiasm and excitement and a passion? Then it probably is a pretty good idea. But if you think the idea and you think, oh, that's going to be so hard, or I don't want to do that or something, then, you know, that's probably a sign that you need to come at that idea, whatever the initial impulse for it, you need to come at it from another angle, probably. I don't think there are any bad ideas, really, because I feel as if even our thoughts and ideas are sourced in divinity. So they come from the source of creation. Every idea, even bad ideas, come from the source of creation. So they have some purpose, but it's usually not the bad ideas. It's usually not the purpose that appears at first. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is you can take a small step in the direction of your intention. Like, say you think to yourself, I would like to take a backpacking adventure in the backcountry of Colorado. Okay, well, the first thing I need to do is I need to be in good enough shape that I can do that without giving myself a heart attack. So, so maybe I'll take a walk around the park and see how that goes, right? So you just take a step in that direction. You see, just ease into it. And if you're easing into your idea and you're getting a yes at every point, if nature answers back, you take the walk around the park, you're like, that was not too bad, and I enjoyed it. Then the next day you take a little bit. I have a friend who walked down the Grand Canyon. He walked into the Grand Canyon and way back to where the big waterfalls are. And it took a while. You have to get the right equipment and you have to work up to that level of physical ability. And, you know, it's like, you can't just, do it overnight. You got to buy a plane ticket. There's a lot of steps. So if you're taking the steps towards your goal and at every step you have a little wave of success, then that's a really good sign. That was a good thing to do. Okay. If the thing is not meant to happen, maybe we just need patience and surrender. And this is where I feel that she kind of answered the question herself. But if it's not meant to happen, maybe we just need patience and surrender to watch how the universe unfolds and gratitude for what we already have. That's a beautiful addition right there. This probably is a saving grace in either case, and in itself helpful in manifesting any intention. And that's absolutely correct, that whatever we intend, underneath our intention, there's a very pure form of that intention. So the closer we can bring our awareness to the purest form of our intention, like the example of wanting people to like you, right? If the wanting people to like you is like more of a superficial value of that intention, the real intention is to experience oneself as beloved. That's like the deeper, more abstract level of the intention. And so if we can get down to the deeper, more abstract level, it's fundamental level. That's why we shined all that light into that part of our process today, right? Because we want to wake up that level of our own cognitive process so that every intention that rises up, we catch it at its inception and we understand it at its most profound level. When that happens, then the intention is already born with a tremendous amount of support of nature. It's already born so close to source, which is like infinite resources and infinite, the switchboard of nature's functioning, right? So from there, you can pull a switch and this happens, or you push the switch that way and that happens, right? So when the intention is born at that level, the path to its manifestation remains clearer all the way up. The sustaining that's why we did the healing with Agni, right? To sustain the intention as it rises up so that it bypasses all the barriers and boundaries on the way. And I think we need to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow too. And as I was reading in here, if something's not meant to happen right now, we just need to have patience. And as I read that, I was thinking, oh, and I've got 2 questions I didn't answer yet. So please forgive me to the people who ask questions. Oh, so one lady says, it wasn't a question, she said, yes, the red blood cells are Lakshmi's gold flowing. Beautiful, beautiful. But there's this like really amazing question that came in also yesterday from a very, very brilliant woman. And it's like actually several questions, and they're really deep questions, and we've come to our hour. So I'm not going to read them tonight, but I know she's going to be with me tomorrow too. So I will answer those questions tomorrow. And I'd like to thank all of you for being together tonight, for all of us. I'm grateful for our collective work. I'm grateful for the collective work we do together. I'm grateful for every one of our being and our being together, our togetherness, and that as a great coherent group, I feel that tonight's webinar, we pulled out more new knowledge than I think I may have ever seen in a webinar before. So I bow down with such adoration and reverence to each one of you for your role in this process, for being present with me, for listening to me, for each of your perspectives, which is slightly different, and allowing us all to come together in this great collective and find deeper understanding to the manifesting process. And on that note, I'm going to say goodnight. Oh, thank you. People are saying goodnight. Oh, the lady who asked the question I'm going to answer tomorrow is saying thank you. And thank you to everyone. Yeah, so we'll do this again tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody then. And we'll go even more deeply into this process and do even more healings. And hopefully, as we get through this weekend's webinar, we will all come out faster and stronger and more powerful manifestors. Yes. Okay. So thank you, everybody. Good night. Or good morning in Bali.